This is the short response for the June 2017 Regents exam. So in question number 25, it says, express the following in simplest form. So notice that you have one trinomial minus a second trinomial. What you want to do in a question like this is line up your x squareds underneath your x squareds, your x's underneath your x's, your plane numbers underneath your plane numbers. This is a subtraction question, but when we have that subtraction question, we would put a minus sign out here. But remember when we did this, we changed the minus sign to a plus sign and then changed all the signs in that second term because we're really adding the opposites, all right? So 3x squared plus 2x squared is 5x squared. This 4x and negative 4x cancel out. And then we have negative 8 plus negative 2, which is negative 10. So your final answer is 5x squared minus 10. If you had a plus 0x in the middle, because you knew that 4x plus negative 4x is 0x, that's fine, all right? Nothing wrong with that. Or if you had it as minus 0x, that's technically the same thing. So if you got one term right, but one term wrong, it would be a plus 1. If you got both of the terms right, it's a plus 2. If you got neither one right, it's a plus 0, all right? Most of these are very straightforward. So take a look at 26. Graph the function. All you had to do was to go up to y equals and type it into y equals on your calculator. I would have hit second and table to find these points, all right? Hit second and table to find these points that fit on the graph. So you should have this graph. Please make sure this is a parabola, so you should have arrows on the ends. If you don't have arrows on the ends, the most that you could get is 1 point, all right? They don't give partial points on the Regents exam. Like they don't give a 1.5 or anything like that. It's either on these 2-point questions, it's either 0, 1, or 2. Then it says for the second part, it says state the vertex of the graph. The vertex is the part on the graph where it turns. So this point right at the top is the vertex, all right? That's the vertex of the graph. So that is over to -3 and then up to +9, all right? That's this point right here. So over to -3, up to +9. Make sure that you wrote it inside parentheses with a comma. If you do not put the parentheses, you cannot get full credit, all right? They're very, very, very picky. So the graph is worth 1 point. The vertex is worth 1 point, all right? Take a look at 27. In 27, state whether 7 minus radical 2 is rational or irrational, and then explain your answer. You get 1 point for saying that it is irrational, all right? Irrational is the correct answer. Why is it irrational? Well, when you actually type this into the calculator, you get this big, long, ugly decimal, 5.5857786, blah, 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 blah. It is a big, long, ugly decimal. It does not terminate. It does not repeat. All right. It is not terminating. It is not terminating. It is not repeating. So if you said that, that would be a good reason. Or you might say when an irrational number is subtracted from a rational number, because that's what we're doing here. We're doing a rational number 7 minus an irrational number radical 2. The answer is always irrational. So something to that effect will give you a +2. If you had irrational, but then didn't write a reason, that's only +1, all right? Questions on that one? Take a look at 28. 28, there are a couple different ways that you could do that, all right? So the easiest way to do this one, it says the value of the car, all right? V of t is value over time. That's what the V stands for. The value over time of a car depreciates according to this equation, all right? Take a look at that equation, where P is the purchase price of the car, T is the time in years since the car was purchased. State the percent that the car value decreases by each year. Well, notice what I highlighted here, the 0.85. In the normal standard equation, that number is a 1, all right? That number is a 1. So because they're using this equation, if it was over 1, like if it was 1.15, then we would be adding 15% each year. But because it's 0.15 lower than 1, what we're doing is we're decreasing by 15% each year. If this was an interest question where you're leaving money in the bank and you're gaining interest over time, this might be like 1.02 if it was 2% interest or something like that. This one is 0.85, so it's less than 1. That means your number that you start off with is going to get lower every year. So how to figure out the 0.85? You could do 1 minus 0.15, which gives you that 0.85, or you could do 1 minus 0.85 to give you that 0.15. 0.15 is 15%. So it's decreasing by 15% every year. Another way, that totally different way that you could do it, was arbitrarily give a value to the car. Let's say that the car was $10,000. If we stick $10,000 in here for year 0, all right, because remember, years always start with 0. If we put 10,000 in for year 0, the value of the car is $10,000. But after 1 year, if we sub in a 1 in for the T now, that's going to be 8,500. How do you find the percent of change? The old minus the new divided by the new equals your percent of change. All right. Or you could do the big number minus the small number divided by the original number. All right. So that gives you 0.15, which is your percent of change. This is the easiest way to do it. All right. 1 minus the 0.85 or 1 minus the 0.15 to give you 0.85. That's the easiest way to do it. So in this one, you are in 29, you're filling out the frequency table here. They give you some of the information. The highlighted stuff is the stuff that they gave you. It says a survey of 100 students was taken. Therefore, I know the total in the survey is 100. It was found that 60 students watch sports. So watch sports, the total was 60. That's where they're getting this green 60 from. 34 students did not like pop music. So did not like pop music, or 34 of these students. So in the watch sports category, 34 did not like pop music. So they gave you that number. Of the students who did not watch sports, 70% liked pop music. So what I have here is, remember that these have to add up. So 26 or some number plus 34 has to give me 60. So I could go backwards and do 60 minus 34 to give me my 26 here. I could do 100 minus 60 to give me my 40 here. Now that I know that that's 40, it says of the students who did not watch sports. Well, how many students did not watch sports? 40 didn't. And it says that 70% didn't like pop. So you need to multiply the 40 times 0.7 or 70% to give you your 28 students. Now that I got my 28, now I can figure out this 12, because 40 minus 28 is 12. Now I could just add the numbers going across. 26 plus 28 is 54. 34 plus 12 is 46. I have 100 and 100 when I add those up. If you got, let's see, there were 6 things that you needed to figure out there. So if you got 3 out of the 6 correct, that would be a 1. So if you got, let's say 3, 4, or 5 correct, that would be 1 out of 2 points. If not, you don't get any. All right. You don't get anything for just putting the 34, 60, and 100. Right. You don't get anything for that. This one, I can guarantee you that even if you are taking the local final, this one is going to be on here, something like this. Super important topic. They have one like this every single year on the Regents. Graph the inequality. So you have y plus 4 is less than -2 times x minus 4. So they want you to graph this. Well, in order to graph it, you need to get the y value all by itself. To get the y value all by itself, the first thing that we need to do is distribute and distribute. -2 times x is -2x. -2 times -4 is a +8. Now we want to move everything onto one side. So we want to try and get this y all by itself. To get the y all by itself, we do -4 and -4. 8 minus 4 is 4. So we have y is less than negative 2x plus 4. Since we have y is less than negative 2x plus 4, remember that your y-intercept is this number. So your y-intercept is this point right here. That's your y-intercept, 0, 4. And then this negative 2 over 1, that's your slope. That is negative 2 over 1. That really means down 2 over 1. So starting from our y-intercept, down 2 over 1, put a dot. Down 2 over 1, put a dot. Down 2 over 1, down 2 over 1. If you only put 3 of the dots, not a problem. All right, I know that's how we did it in class before. Another way that you could have done that is you could have went into your y equals and typed in y equals negative 2x plus 4. That will give you, when you go to the table, that will give you those points. Even though it's less than, that's fine. All right, all that the less than symbol means is that when we connect the dots, it's going to be a dotted line and we're shading below. That's all that the less than symbol means. All right, so you could have just typed this in and then did second and table to find your dots. Couple different things here. If you forgot the shade, the most you can get is 1 out of 2. If you use a solid line instead of a dotted line, the most you can get is 1 out of 2. If you forgot the arrows on the ends of the line, the most you could get is 1 out of 2. This one didn't specifically say to label your line, but other Regents exams do say to label it. So always make sure that you're labeling. That's just a good habit to have. All right. So anyway, that is a 2-point question. Number 31, there's 2 completely different ways to do number 31. It says if the f of x equals x squared and the g of x equals x, determine the values of x that satisfy the equation where they are equal to each other. So one of the ways that you could do this is to set them equal to each other. When does x squared equal x? Well, in order to do this, I would get everything onto one side and set it equal to 0. So I did minus x and minus x. Now I can factor that part of the equation. I can factor out an x, so the x goes outside the parentheses. All the leftovers go inside. Now I'm going to solve for x. So I'm going to draw my line down, set both sides equal to 0. So I have just x equals 0 here, and I have x minus 1 equals 0 here, plus 1 plus 1. So you get x equals 1. So my 2 answers are 0 and 1. That's probably the hard way to do it. The easier way to do it is to just graph the 2 equations. The red line here is y equals x. And the parabola here is, in blue, is y equals x squared. So I could graph these 2 and see where they cross. All right, they cross in 2 spots. They cross at these 2 purple points. They cross at 0, 0, and they cross at 1, 1. So my x values, remember all points are written x comma y. So I have x equaling 0 and x equaling 1, because it wants to know, determine the values of x. It says nothing about finding y. All right, so determine the values of x. So they are 0 and 1. A lot of these questions you will find by graphing it, you'll get the answer. Question number 32. This is another one where you needed to graph it. You can put any number in for a that you want, as long as a is greater than 0. So if I wanted to, I could have put a 2 here and a 2 here. All right, just graph them and see how they changed. Your original equation is this absolute value of x. Remember, to do the absolute value, you had to hit second and catalog. When you hit second and catalog at the bottom of the calculator, that's where the absolute value symbol is. It says ABS, all right, ABS for absolute value. So what we're doing here is we are subtracting a just from the x value. If we subtract a just from the x value, what is it going to do to the equation? What is it going to do to the graph? It is a translation. Notice that it says describe the effect that each transformation below has on it. It is a translation because we are sliding it to the right, how many ever A happens to be. So if A was 2, we'd slide it 2 places to the right. If A was 3, we'd slide it 3 places to the right. Here in the second one, we're subtracting A from the entire thing. Since we're subtracting A from the entire thing, when you would go to graph it, you would have a translation moving down. So a translation of down A units. Each of those is worth 1 point. It's another 2-point question. Again, the easiest way would be to graph it and look at it. Take a look at 33. Now, 33, notice that this starts the 4-point questions, all right? Notice that this starts the 4-point questions. It says the function r of x is defined by the expression x squared plus 3x minus 18. Use factoring to determine the zeros of the r of x. So what you're looking at here is x squared plus 3x minus 18. What times what equals negative 18 that adds up to 3? What times what is negative 18 that adds up to 3? Well, it is 6 and negative 3. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. 6 plus negative 3 is positive 3. So we want to find these zeros. So after we factor it and have x plus 6 and x minus 3, we draw our line down the middle, set both sides equal to 0, and solve for x. So x plus 6 equals 0. We get x equals negative 6. X minus 3 equals 0. We get x equals 3. This is worth 1 point. This is worth 1 point. Explain what the zeros represent on the graph. Well, what the zeros would represent, those are your x-intercepts. If we actually went and graphed this, negative 6, 0 would be like right here, and 3, 0 would be right here. Those zeros are the x-intercepts. All right, those zeros are the x-intercepts. This answer is worth 2. When we take a look at 34, the graph below models Craig's trip to visit his friend in another state. In the course of his travels, he encountered both highway and city driving. Now, the first thing that I want to do is I want to look at the graph and really see what's going on here. First of all, how long is he traveling? He's traveling 7 hours, all right, 7 hours, not 7 minutes, not 7 seconds, all right? He's traveling 7 hours, so this is a long trip. How many total miles is he traveling? In that 7 hours, he's traveling 230 miles in that 7 hours. So question number 1, based on the graph, during which interval did Craig most likely drive in the city? Explain your reasoning, all right? So which one did he drive in the city at? Is he going to drive 110 miles in a city over 2 hours? No, that doesn't make any sense, all right? First of all, a city is not 110 miles long, right? It's 130 miles from here to Buffalo. So 120 miles, let's say Corning to Buffalo, all right? That's not the length of a city. So that doesn't make any sense. So it's not A to B. Did he drive in the city from B to C? No, he's not covering any distance. So he wasn't driving in the city if he's not covering any distance. How about C to D? In C to D, he's going from 3.5 to 5 hours. So he's going an hour and a half. And it looks like he's traveling 90 miles in an hour and a half. Again, is that driving in the city? Is 90 miles the length of a city? No. All right. So C to D doesn't make any sense. But here, 200 to 230. That's only traveling 30 miles, and that's over 2 hours. Could you drive around the city of Elmira and do 30 miles in 2 hours? Yeah, very easily. Right? Very easily. So the correct answer here is D to E. All right, that's the segment. That's worth 1 point. If you said D to E, that's worth 1 point. Now, the explanation is worth the second point. Explain your reasoning. Well, there's a couple different ways that you could explain it. First of all, it is the slowest speed or rate. If you actually found the rate that he was traveling, if he traveled 30 miles in 2 hours, you could find the slope, right? Slope or rate of change is the same exact thing. So if I found the slope between those 2 points, I would do 230 minus 200 over 7 minus 5. That is your y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. That's where I'm getting those numbers from for my 2 points at D and E. And 30 divided by 2, you could just take your total miles, 30, divided by your 2 hours. He's driving around at 15 miles an hour. That makes a lot of sense for driving in the city, all right? Where these other ones do not. So that explanation is worth 1, depending on however you word it. Explain what might have happened in the interval between B and C. In between B and C right here, he's not traveling any distance, but time is going on. So for an hour and a half, he didn't go anywhere. What could have he been doing? He could have stopped to eat. He could have stopped to take a nap. There's lots of different answers that you could do, but it has to be something that he stopped. All right, that's worth 1 point. Determine Craig's average speed to the nearest tenth of a mile for his entire trip. So E, all right, point E is 7 hours, and he went 230 miles. 230 divided by 7. His average speed was 32.9 miles per hour, all right? Because you have to divide miles divided by hours. So that is the 4th point. Questions on that one? Take a look at 35. In 35, this is another 4-point question, all right? Another 4-point question. Solve the equation. Now, this one's sort of tricky because of this number right here. Notice how they stuck a 2 in front of this equation. Because they stuck a 2 in front of the equation, it says solve the equation where the g of x equals 2 times the k of x. That 2 is represented right here. All right, be very, very careful. You have the g of x, you have the k of x, but you have to multiply that k of x by 2. So you have to distribute and distribute. 2 times 2x is 4x. 2 times 16 is 32. So now we have the g of x, 2x squared plus 3x plus 10, equals the 4x plus 32. We want to set the one side equal to 0. So I want to do minus 4x from each side, minus 32x from each side to have this 0 right here. Now I can just do the quadratic formula. I wouldn't try and factor this. I wouldn't try and factor it because you would have a 2x and an x. That is super hard to factor. All right. I wouldn't try and factor it. I would just use the quadratic formula. So remember, this is your a value. The -1 is your b value. The -22 is your c value. Stick it into the quadratic formula. They wanted it rounded to the nearest 10th. Even with the directions saying rounded to the nearest 10th, that's another reason why I wouldn't do it this way. All right. Because that's going to be super hard to factor. So you end up with 1 plus or minus the square root of 177 divided by 4. You could just type that into your calculator once with the plus sign, type it in a second time with the minus sign. You end up with 3.6 and 3.1. This was worth 1 point each. All right, that was worth 1 point each. The explanation here is worth 2 points. Explain why you chose the method you used to solve this quadratic equation. I chose the quadratic formula, all right, because it was the easiest to use when a equaled 2. Something to that effect, all right, whatever method you chose to use. That's the way I would do it. This one is probably the hardest question on the whole entire thing, and it's hard because of option number 2. It says Michael has $10 in his savings account. Option number 1 will add $100 to his account every week. So he's just going to take that $10. After every week, he's adding 100. So after week number 1, he has 110. After week number 2, he has 210. After week number 3, he has 310. Option 2 will double the amount in his account at the end of every week. So he starts off with $10. At the end of 1 week, he has $20. Then he has $40. Then he has $80. Then he has $160. Then he has $320. So write a function in terms of X to model each option of saving. So option number 1, he's starting off with $10 and he's adding $100 every week. So $100 times the number of weeks. This is a hard equation to set up. Option number 2 is even harder to set up. 10 times 2 to the X power. That is extremely, extremely hard to set up. You would think you would be multiplying by 2 or like 2x or something like that, but it's not, because you're doubling each time. It would be 2 to the X power. Michael wants to have at least, so this is worth 1 point. This is worth 1 point. This work is worth 1 point. And then our statement here at the end is worth 1 point. Michael wants to have at least. At least means greater than or equal to $700 in his account by the end of 7 weeks to buy a bike. Determine which option will help him reach his goal. Well, so that means by the end of 7 weeks, that's what we're putting in for X as the amount of time. So if you put 7 into here, you're going to end up with $710. At the end of 7 weeks here, when we put that in, you end up with $1,280. Both option 1 and 2 will enable him to reach his goal because it says at least 700. Both of them ended up over 700. That was a very, very, very difficult question. And the last question. So in this last question, Central High School has 5 members on their swim team. Notice how they tried to trick you here. All right, a lot of people have the very bad habit of when they read a word problem, just sort of eyeing the numbers. And here they tried to trick you a little bit by writing the word. All right, that's one of the classic ways that they try and trick you. So had 5 members on their swim team in 2010. Over the next several years, the team increased by an average of 10 members per year. So when I go to write that equation, I'm starting off with 5 and I'm adding 10 per year. So 10 times the number of years. The same school had 35 members in the chorus. So I'm starting off with 35 and it showed an increase of 5 members per year. So 35 plus 5x. These are your 2 equations. All right, those are your 2 equations. By the way, notice that this one is a 6-point question. So I would say this is worth 1 point. This is worth 1 point. Each graph, when you go to graph it, each graph would be worth 1 point. The coordinate here would be worth 1 point, and the explanation would be worth 1 point. All right. So anyway, I would take and I would graph these 2 equations. You could just type them right into your y equals and graph those 2 equations. This is when you do second and table. These are the actual points that you get. So you graph it and you see where they cross. They cross right here. It says explain in detail what each coordinate of the point of intersection of these equations means in the context of the question. Well, what does the intersection point of 6, 65 mean? Well, it means in year 6, that's what the 6 means, there will be 65 members in each group. That's when the 2 groups will be equal, or that's when the 2 groups will each have 65 members. That's what it means. So again, that would be a 6-point question. When you take a look at your scores here, all right, go back through and add up how many you got and see what you would have gotten on the exam.